The smell hit Marcus Thompson first before the sight of it. Wet, fur, and something else. Something wrong. Like meat left too long in the Sunday. He was 63 years old, had spent 40 years studying the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and he'd never smelled anything like it. The thing was bleeding out in the ravine below his cabin, massive and impossible, and Marcus stood there on his porch with his coffee going cold in his hand, knowing his life was about to split clean in two, before this moment and after. Everything changes when you find something that shouldn't exist. Everything. Now, I know what you're thinking. Another Bigfoot story. Right? Some grainy footage, some cast footprints, a bunch of maybes and could-bes. But here's the thing, Marcus Thompson wasn't some cryptid chaser with a YouTube channel and a thermal camera. He was a forest ecologist. Peer-reviewed publications, 37 years with the Forest Service before retirement. The kind of man who dealt in data, not legends. And what he found in that ravine, it wasn't a story. It wasn't folklore. It was bleeding, breathing, and looking right at him with eyes that held something he'd only ever seen in mirrors: intelligence. Fear, the knowledge that death was close. This is what happened when a scientist decided to do the one thing science tells you never to do. Get involved. Get attached. Keep a secret that could rewrite everything we think we know about what walks in the deep woods. Quick thing, if you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm push these stories to people who appreciate the strange and unexplained. Plus, it lets me know you want more content like this. Alright, back to that morning. September 17th, 2004. The day Marcus Thompson stopped being a scientist and became something else. Something between guardian and accomplice. A keeper of impossible things. The cabin sat 12 miles outside of Cascade Ridge, Oregon, deep enough in the timber that you couldn't see another light at night. Marcus had bought it with his retirement money. Claire's life insurance, if he was being honest about it. She'd been gone 3 years by then. 3 years of their house in Portland feeling too big and too empty. Every room an echo chamber for memories. The cabin was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to finish his book on old-growth forest systems, a place to stop hearing her voice in every corner. It worked, mostly. Out here, the silence was different. It had weight, sure, but it was the weight of trees and stone and water, not grief. The forest didn't care that he was alone. It had its own concerns, its own rhythms. Dawn came whether you were ready or not. Ravens called for reasons that had nothing to do with human loss. The creek ran cold and clear, indifferent to the fact that Marcus sometimes stood on its bank and forgot why he'd walked down there. He'd been at the cabin 8 months when he found the creature. 8 months of routine wake at 5:30, coffee on the porch, morning hike to check his trail cameras, afternoon writing, evening reading, sleep by 9. The kind of schedule that looks peaceful from the outside but feels like trying to outrun your own shadow. Grief doesn't care about routines. It finds you anyway, usually around 2 in the morning when the house creaks, and for half a second you think it's her getting up for water. But that morning, that September morning, with the first real cold snap sharpening the air, Marcus's routine broke. He was on the porch, watching the mist burn off the valley below when he heard it. Not the sound itself, not at first, more like the absence of sound. The birds had stopped, every single one. In 40 years of fieldwork, Marcus knew that silence meant something. Predator close, bear, maybe. Cougar, if he was unlucky. He set his coffee down the mug Claire had given him for their 25th anniversary, the one that said "World's Okayest Husband" in faded letters, and listened. The silence had texture. It pressed against his ears like water. Then, from the ravine, north of the cabin, a sound that made his stomach drop. A low moan, almost human, but not quite. Pain in it. Desperation. Marcus grabbed his rifle from inside. A Winchester .308. Older than his marriage, reliable as sunrise. He'd shot 2 bears with it over the years, both times in defense of campers who'd gotten stupid with food storage. The weight of it was familiar in his hands, comforting. He moved off the porch, boots crunching on gravel, and headed toward the ravine. The smell hit him 30 feet from the edge. Sweet rot and wet dog and something else, something sharp like iron. Blood. A lot of it. Marcus approached slowly, rifle ready, eyes scanning. The ravine was maybe 20 feet deep, thick with ferns and devil's club, a small creek running along the bottom. And there, halfway down the slope, was something his mind couldn't quite process at first. Too big for a bear, wrong shape for an elk. It was on its side, one arm, and Christ, it was an arm, not a foreleg draped across its chest. Dark fur, matted with blood, 7 feet tall if it was standing, maybe more. The face. Jesus. The face. Flat like a man's but broader. The jaw massive. The brow heavy. Eyes closed. Chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Marcus had seen bears up close. Moose, elk, mountain lions. He'd cataloged hundreds of species over his career. But this was in his mental catalog under impossible. Under doesn't exist. Under campfire stories and hoaxes and blurry photographs that always turned out to be something explainable. He stood there for what felt like hours but was probably 90 seconds, rifle pointed at the thing in the ravine, his heart doing things that couldn't be healthy for a 63-year-old man with high blood pressure. The creature's chest kept moving. Up, down, blood pooled under it, dark and thick, soaking into the moss. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. His voice sounded too loud, too human. Jesus Christ. The thing's eyes opened, not slowly like in the movies, just open, sudden, like someone hitting a switch, and they focused on him, brown eyes, deep and clear and absolutely unmistakably aware. Not animal awareness, the kind that tracks movement, measures threat, human awareness, the kind that knows it's being seen, the kind that understands death, might be standing above it with a rifle. Marcus should have pulled the trigger, or run, or called someone, the sheriff, the Forest Service, somebody. Instead, he found himself doing the math on blood loss and shock and survival odds, the same calculations he'd done in Vietnam 45 years ago when his squad found wounded in the jungle. Medical training doesn't ask what you're treating, it just asks what it needs. The creature's breathing was getting shallower. A wound in its side, puncture wound, deep, maybe 8 inches across, was bleeding steady. Not arterial spray, but enough to kill in an hour, maybe less. Marcus could see broken ribs through the torn flesh. See the way the chest hitched on one side, probably pneumothorax, lung collapsed or collapsing. God damn it, he said. To himself, to God, to Claire, who'd always said his problem was he couldn't leave well enough alone. God damn it. He went back to the cabin, left the rifle on the porch. If the thing wanted to kill him, a gun wouldn't help much at this range anyway. He grabbed his first aid kit, the big one, the one he kept for hiking emergencies. Then the veterinary kit he had for treating injured wildlife. Gauze, antiseptic, sutures, antibiotics. He stood in his living room for 10 seconds, holding supplies, thinking about what he was about to do. Then he filled a canteen with water, grabbed a tarp, and headed back to the ravine. The thing was still alive, still watching him with those impossible eyes. Marcus slid down the slope, boots finding purchase in loose soil, and knelt beside it. Up close, the smell was worse, but under the blood and the rot infection there was another smell, musky but clean, like cedar and turned earth, the smell of something wild that didn't want to be. Easy, Marcus said, though whether he was talking to the creature or himself, he couldn't say. Look, I don't know what the hell you are, but you're dying, and I can maybe fix that. Maybe. You understand me? The creature blinked once, slow, deliberate, and Marcus felt his scalp prickle. Because that wasn't an animal blink, that was communication. That was yes. He spent the next 4 hours working. The wound was deep, ragged, like something had gored it, antlers, maybe, or tusks. The ribs were broken, but not shattered. The lung was partially collapsed, but not punctured. Marcus cleaned the wound with antiseptic that made the creature tense and growl, a sound that vibrated in his chest like standing too close to a diesel engine. He sutured what he could, packed the wound with gauze, wrapped the chest with ace bandages to stabilize the ribs. The whole time, the creature watched him. Didn't fight. Didn't even flinch much except when the antiseptic burned. Where'd you learn to stay still like this? Marcus muttered, more to fill the silence than anything, because most wild things would have torn my throat out by now. When it was done, when the bleeding had slowed to a seep and the chest was wrapped and Marcus's back was screaming from being bent over for so long, he sat back against a tree and looked at what he'd done. The creature was breathing easier, eyes half closed, exhausted or maybe just trusting enough to rest. Either way, it was a miracle, or a nightmare. Hard to tell which. Marcus stayed until sunset, gave the creature water by cupping his hands and letting it drink those massive lips, careful and gentle, taking water without touching his skin. When the light started to fail and the cold came down from the peaks, he climbed out of the ravine, went back to the cabin, and sat on his porch in the dark, staring at nothing. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. Something that felt like standing at a crossroads, knowing that every choice from here on out would matter in ways he couldn't predict. He just saved the life of a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. And it had looked at him with understanding, with something like gratitude. Claire, he said to the darkness, to the ghost of his wife, that sometimes felt closer than the trees, what the hell did I just do? The forest didn't answer. It never did. But somewhere in the ravine below, something was breathing that hadn't been breathing 6 hours ago. Something impossible. Something Marcus Thompson had decided was worth saving. And that decision, that one moment of choosing compassion over reason, was about to cost him 40 years. 40 years of secrecy. 40 years of a life split in two. The public, Marcus, and the real one. The one who kept a living Sasquatch in the forest behind his cabin and learned that intelligence doesn't need language to communicate. That loneliness can be shared between species. That some bonds form not because they should, but because they must. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the first night. The night Marcus went back down to the ravine with a sleeping bag and a thermos of coffee and sat vigil over something that shouldn't be real. The night he heard it speak, the temperature dropped to 32 degrees that night. Marcus could see his breath in the beam of his flashlight as he made his way down to the ravine just after midnight. He hadn't been able to sleep, kept thinking about shock, about infection, about a wounded animal dying alone in the cold. Didn't matter that it wasn't technically an animal. Or maybe it did matter, maybe that made it worse. The creature was awake. Marcus saw the gleam of its eyes before anything else. 2 points of reflected light in the darkness. He climbed down slow, making noise so it would know he was coming. The beam of his flashlight played over massive shoulders, over that face that was almost human, but not quite. The creature was sitting up, or trying to. One hand braced against the ravine wall, chest heaving with the effort. Hey, easy, Marcus said. He set the sleeping bag down, popped open the thermos. The smell of coffee filled the small space. You shouldn't be moving. Those ribs need time. The creature made a sound, low, throaty, almost like speech, but not quite. Syllables without consonants. And then, clear as anything in the cold air, a word that made Marcus's spine go straight. Hurt. Not growled, not approximated. Spoken. The word was rough, the pronunciation thick, but it was English. Actual English. Marcus stood there with his thermos in hand, his flashlight beam steady on the creature's face, and felt reality tilt on its axis. You can talk, he said, not a question. A statement of fact, though his brain was still trying to catch up to his ears. You can understand me. The creature looked at him with those brown eyes, and Marcus saw pain there. Physical pain, yes, but something else too. The look of someone who just revealed a secret they'd kept for a very long time. A look that said, yes, and now you know. And now everything changes. Hurt, it said again, quieter. A massive hand, fingers thick as Marcus's wrists, nails dark and cracked, moved to touch the bandaged chest. You, help. Marcus sat down, hard on the slope. His knees weren't great arthritis that flared up in cold weather, but it wasn't his knees making him sit. It was the weight of what he was hearing, what it meant. Sasquatch was real. That was one thing. But Sasquatch could talk? Could understand complex concepts like help and hurt and you? That was something else entirely. That was, hell, he didn't know what that was. Yeah, he managed. I helped. You're welcome. The creature studied him for a long moment. Then, with effort that made its face tighten in pain, it extended one hand, palm up, the gesture of offering, or peace. Marcus had seen enough different cultures to recognize that some body language was universal. This was one of those moments. He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched that palm with his own. The hand was warm, calloused. The skin rough like old leather, but not scaled, not weird, just skin. Human-ish skin on something that was only partially human. Marcus, he said, felt like introductions were appropriate. My name's Marcus. The creature's mouth moved, lips pulling back to show teeth that were too large, too many, but flat like a human's, not fanged. It was trying to smile. The effect was unsettling, uncanny valley territory, but the intent was clear. Kale, it said. KL. And just like that, everything changed. The thing in the ravine wasn't a specimen or a discovery or a creature anymore. It was a person. A wounded person Marcus had saved. A person with a name. They sat there in the dark, hand in hand, while the forest whispered around them and the stars turned overhead. Marcus gave KL water from his canteen. Checked the bandages by flashlight, some seepage, but not bad. The creature KL watched him work with that unsettling intelligence, sometimes making sounds that might have been words, mostly just enduring. Where'd you come from? Marcus asked at one point, not expecting an answer, just filling silence the way humans do. What hurt you? KL's face did something complicated, expression passing over those heavy features like clouds across the moon. Mountain, it said finally. Bull elk. Big. Angry. A pause then. Stupid. Was stupid. Marcus almost laughed. The absurdity of it sitting in a ravine at 1 a.m, having a conversation about hunting accidents with a Sasquatch who spoke broken English. But the laugh died in his throat because there was nothing funny about this. Nothing funny about the fact that this being had been alone and wounded and would have died if Marcus hadn't found it. Nothing funny about the fact that they were talking, actually communicating, and Marcus had no idea what to do with that information. "You've been watching," Marcus said. Not a question. The English was too good, even broken. Watching people, learning. Kale nodded. A human gesture that looked strange on that massive head. Long time, many years. Watch, listen, learn words. It touched its chest again, winced, but no talk, never talk, dangerous. People. It struggled for the word, made a gesture that might have meant scared or violent or both. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "People would be scared. Or they'd want to capture you, study you. You'd never be free again." "Yes." The word came out as a sigh. "So hide. Always hide. Until now." Until now. Because Marcus had found him. Because Marcus had helped instead of shooting or running or calling the authorities. And now Kale was trusting him with the biggest secret in natural history. The weight of that pressed down on Marcus like the cold, like the dark, like 40 years of marriage and 3 years of grief and 63 years of trying to do right in a world that didn't always reward it. "I won't tell anyone," Marcus heard himself say. "About you. About this. I won't." KL's eyes found his in the flashlight beam, held there, looking for lies, maybe, or looking for trust. Whatever it was searching for, it must have found it, because that massive head nodded once. Agreement, or maybe just exhaustion. Hard to tell. Marcus stayed until dawn, dozed a little against the tree, woke up stiff and cold to find KL watching him with an expression he couldn't read. In the gray light before sunrise, the creature looked less monstrous, more human. Or maybe Marcus was just getting used to what he was seeing. The mind adapts. It has to. He climbed out of the ravine as the sun broke over the peaks, flooding the valley with gold light that made everything look clean and new and possible. The cabin sat there among the trees, solid and real, Claire's wind chimes hanging from the porch beam, his coffee mug still sitting where he'd left it yesterday morning. A lifetime ago, Marcus went inside, made fresh coffee, stood at the window looking down toward the ravine where something impossible was healing, and he thought about secrets, about the weight of knowing something no one else knew, about how his life had just split in two, and there was no going back to before KL, before the decision to help instead of run. "What now?" he said to the empty cabin. To Claire's ghost. To himself. The answer came slow, but it came. He'd do what he always did. Adapt, survive, figure it out one day at a time. Because that's what you do when life throws you something impossible. You don't have to understand it. You just have to decide whether you're going to be the person who turns away or the person who stays. Marcus Thompson, 63 years old, widower, retired forest ecologist, had already made his choice. He'd made it the moment he climbed down into that ravine with the first aid kit and decided that suffering was suffering no matter what shape it wore. Now he just had to live with the consequences. For better or worse, in secrecy and silence, for however long this impossible thing lasted. Turned out, it would last 40 years. 40 years of a life split between the public Marcus who wrote papers and consulted with the Forest Service and attended conferences, and the private Marcus who had a friend in the forest. A friend who wasn't supposed to exist. A friend who taught him that intelligence and humanity aren't the same thing, and sometimes the most human thing you can do is protect something that would be destroyed if the world ever found out. But that first morning, standing in his cabin with coffee going cold in his hand for the second time in 24 hours, Marcus didn't know any of that yet. He just knew he'd crossed a line, and there was no crossing back. The next 3 months were the strangest of Marcus's life, and that included his tour in Vietnam and the year Claire was dying. Strange doesn't cover it, really. Surreal, maybe. Like living in two worlds that occupied the same space but never quite touched. By day, Marcus was himself. He worked on his book, A Comprehensive Study of Old-Growth Ecosystems in the Pacific Northwest. He took his morning hikes, checked his trail cameras, documented the seasonal changes in the forest. Twice a month, he drove into Cascade Ridge for supplies and to check in with the Forest Service office. He was Marcus Thompson, retired ecologist, recent widower, the quiet guy who'd bought the Halverson cabin up near Deadman Creek. People nodded at him in the grocery store, asked about his book, mentioned the weather. Normal, small-town interactions that felt increasingly hollow, because by night, and sometimes during the day, when he was sure no one was around, Marcus was someone else. He was the man who brought food to the ravine, who changed bandages on a creature that shouldn't exist, who sat on the slope in the cold and learned that language was only one way to communicate, and maybe not even the best way. Kale healed fast. faster than any human would have, faster even than Marcus expected from wildlife. Within a week, the wound had scabbed over. Within 2, the ribs had knitted enough that Cale could move without that hitch in his breathing. By the end of the first month, he was walking, or rather, moving through the forest with a grace that made Marcus feel clumsy and loud by comparison. But Cale didn't leave. That was the thing Marcus hadn't expected. He'd assumed once the creature could move, it would vanish back into the deep woods, return to wherever it came from. Instead, Cale stayed near the cabin, not in the ravine anymore, too exposed, but somewhere in the timber to the north. Marcus would step onto his porch in the morning and catch glimpses, a flash of dark fur between the trees, a handprint in the frost near the wood pile, small signs that said, "I'm here, I'm watching, I haven't forgotten." And then, 3 weeks after that first night, Cale knocked on Marcus's door, not like a person knocks, more like tapping, gentle, almost apologetic. Marcus was reading some mystery novel that wasn't holding his attention when he heard it. 3 soft thumps on wood. He got up, checked the window first out of reflex, and saw Cale standing on his porch. 8 feet tall, maybe 850. Broad as a refrigerator, covered in dark fur that had dried blood matted in places, scars showing white underneath, and absolutely undeniably real. Marcus opened the door. They stood there looking at each other, man and whatever Cale was, while the November wind rattled the pines and brought the smell of coming snow. "Hey," Marcus said, "because what else do you say?" "Cold," Cale replied. His English had improved. Still rough, still heavily accented, but clearer. "Can come in." It was a question. A request, not a demand, and something in Marcus's chest loosened at that, at the courtesy in it, at the recognition that this was Marcus's space, and Cale was asking permission to enter it. "Yeah," Marcus said, stepping back. "Yeah, come in." Cale had to duck to fit through the door, had to turn sideways to get those massive shoulders through the frame. Once inside, he stood in Marcus's living room, making the space feel instantly smaller, and looked around with open curiosity. At the bookshelves, at the fireplace, at the photographs on the mantle, including the one of Marcus and Claire on their wedding day, both of them young and stupid and happy. "Your mate," Cale said, gesturing to the photo. "Gone." "Yeah." Marcus's throat tightened. "Cancer. 3 years ago." Cale nodded slowly. "My mate. Also gone. Long ago." He touched his chest where the scar was, visible even through the fur. Heart just stopped. And there it was. Common ground, not between scientist and subject, not between human and cryptid, but between 2 beings who'd lost the people they loved. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd been maintaining crumble just a little. "I'm sorry," he said. "Sorry," Cale echoed. "Yes, I'm sorry too." They stood there in silence for a moment, the wind outside and the fire crackling, and the weight of grief hanging in the air between them like smoke. Then Cale moved to the bookshelf, ran one massive finger along the spines. "Books. Have many. You can read?" Marcus asked, then felt stupid for asking. If Cale could speak English, why not read it? "Some. Learn from watching. Signs. Papers and trash. Hard, but..." Cale pulled a book from the shelf, a field guide to Pacific Northwest flora, and opened it carefully. Those huge hands, surprisingly gentle with the pages. Pictures. Help. Over the next hour, as the November dark settled in and Marcus added wood to the fire, they talked. Or rather, Cale talked and Marcus listened, his entire understanding of the world rearranging itself with every sentence. There were others. Not many, maybe 3 dozen in all of North America, but they existed. Had always existed. For as long as humans had, maybe longer. They lived in the deep places, the remote pockets of wilderness humans hadn't completely overrun. They had language their own, complex and layered in ways Cale couldn't easily explain. They had culture, history, stories passed down through generations about the time before humans, about the great ice, about the slow retreat into smaller and smaller spaces as humans spread. "We die out," Cale said quietly, staring into the fire. "Slow. Each generation, fewer. Not enough space. Not enough others. Too few to make children." "How old are you?" Marcus asked. 67 winters. Cale glanced at him. "You?" 63. Something passed between them. Recognition. They were old men, both of them, in the twilight of their lives. The world moving on without them. Change coming, whether they wanted it or not. "Why show yourself?" Marcus asked. "To me, I mean. You could have stayed hidden, could have healed and left." Cale was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Wind rattled the windows. Finally, tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of alone. Thought. He struggled for words. His face, doing that complicated thing Marcus was learning to recognize as deep emotion. Thought, "Maybe you understand. You also alone. You also, he gestured vaguely, searching. Lost. Yeah, lost. That was the word, wasn't it? Marcus had been lost since Claire died, going through motions, existing but not living, and somehow Cale had seen that, had recognized a kindred spirit in grief and loneliness. I'm glad you came to my door, Marcus said. Cale looked at him, really looked, with those deep brown eyes that held too much understanding, and nodded. Yes, am glad too. That night marked the real beginning. The first night became a pattern. Cale would come to the cabin after dark, when there was no risk of being seen. They'd sit by the fire. Sometimes they talked, Cale's English improving rapidly, like he'd been holding back a dam and now words flowed freely. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, two old souls grateful for company. Marcus learned about Cale's people, their biology not quite human, not quite ape, something in between that had split off the evolutionary tree maybe 1,000,000 years ago. Their intelligence, different from humans but no less sophisticated. Their senses, so much sharper. Cale could hear Marcus's heartbeat from across the room, could smell rain coming 3 days out, could see in darkness that was absolute black to human eyes. And Cale learned about humans, about technology and cities and the sprawling complexity of human civilization. He was fascinated by books, by the idea of storing knowledge outside the mind, preserving it across generations. His people had oral traditions, stories and knowledge passed down, but nothing like this, nothing permanent. Show me, Cale said one night, gesturing to Marcus's laptop. The computer. Show how works. Marcus did. Showed him the internet carefully, sticking to nature sites and educational resources, nothing that might show Cale's own image or the countless Bigfoot sighting hoaxes. Cale watched with absolute focus, those massive fingers surprisingly deft on the keyboard once Marcus showed him how. So much, Cale murmured, scrolling through a database of forest ecology studies. All this knowledge, all these humans, sharing, learning. He looked at Marcus. We lose knowledge. Elders die. Stories die with them. No way to save. I could teach you, Marcus said, to read better, to write. You could record your people's stories, preserve them. Cale's face lit up as much as that heavy alien face could light up with something like hope. Yes, would like that. Would like very much, so they added that to their routine. Reading lessons, writing lessons. Marcus dug out old notebooks, taught Cale to hold a pen awkward with those huge hands, but determined. They started with simple words, progressed to sentences. Within 3 months, Cale was writing in halting but readable English, filling notebooks with stories about his people, their history, their struggles, the slow dying of a species. It was through the writing that Marcus learned about the others who'd been killed, not by nature, not by disease, but by humans. Cale wrote about his grandfather, shot by hunters in 1943, who'd thought they'd bagged a bear until they got close. About a young female captured in the 70s, who died in captivity, stress, or despair. Cale didn't know which. About a male who'd been hit by a logging truck in the 80s, his body disappeared by the company to avoid questions. You fear us, Cale wrote one night, his handwriting still shaky but improving. But we fear you more. You are many, we are few. You have guns and traps and want to know everything. We just want to live. Marcus read those words by firelight and felt something like shame, collective human shame for what his species had done, was still doing, the endless encroachment, the destruction of habitat, the curiosity that too often became cruelty. I won't let that happen to you, he said. I promise. No one will know you're here. Cale looked at him with those ancient eyes. Why? Why protect? Why risk? Marcus thought about it, about Claire, who'd always said his greatest strength and weakness was that he couldn't walk past suffering. About his time in Vietnam, the medic training he'd never really used outside the war until that day in the ravine. About being 63 years old and alone and finding purpose in the strangest place imaginable. Because it's right, he said finally. And because you're my friend, the word hung in the air between them. Friend. Cale repeated it, tasting the syllables, then nodded, reached out one massive hand. Marcus took it, and they sat there by the fire, old man and older being, in a friendship that shouldn't exist, but did. A friendship that would define the rest of Marcus's life. The first winter was hard, not because of Cale, he was built for cold, thrived in it actually, but because Marcus had to learn to live double, to maintain his normal life in town while hiding the biggest secret in natural history, to smile and nod at the grocery store while thinking about the 8-foot-tall being currently reading Darwin in his cabin, to attend Forest Service meetings and discuss wildlife management while sitting on knowledge that would revolutionize biology. The lying wore on him. Not big lies, he didn't have to make up much, but lies of omission, the careful editing of his life. When Jake Miller from the ranger station asked what he'd been up to, Marcus would say working on the book instead of teaching a Sasquatch to read. When Sarah Chen from the university called about consulting on her research project, he'd decline. Not because he was busy, but because he couldn't risk her visiting the cabin. Paranoia became a constant companion. Marcus checked his trail cameras obsessively, terrified someone might catch footage of KL. He varied his hiking routes, making sure no patterns emerged that might draw attention. He bought supplies in bulk so he wouldn't have to explain why a single man needed so much food. The deception was exhausting, but the friendship was worth it. That's what kept Marcus going through the difficult parts. Coming home to find Kale already at the cabin, fire going, dinner started. The creature had learned to cook after a fashion. The conversations that ranged from ecology to philosophy to the nature of consciousness. The quiet evenings reading side by side, comfortable in silence. The sense that for the first time since Claire died, Marcus wasn't alone. Kale was learning fast. By spring, his English was fluent. He could read at a high school level, write clearly, use the computer with surprising skill. He devoured Marcus's library, everything from field guides to novels to Marcus's own published papers. He had opinions about everything. Loved Steinbeck, thought Hemingway was too terse, found Stephen King unnecessarily violent. Humans strange, Kale said one evening, setting down the stand with a shake of his head. Write about monsters, when humans are the monsters. We're complicated, Marcus offered. Complicated. Kale snorted a sound that shouldn't have been possible from that throat, but was. Good word for it. Complicated means both brilliant and terrible, yes? Create art, also create weapons. Save forests, also destroy them. Save me, also would capture me if they knew. He wasn't wrong. The duality of human nature was something Marcus had wrestled with his whole life. In Vietnam, he'd seen men commit acts of remarkable compassion and unspeakable cruelty, sometimes within the same day. Humanity's greatest strength was also its weakness, the ability to hold contradictions, to be both angel and devil. Not all of us would capture you, Marcus said. Enough would, enough to matter. Kale looked at him seriously. You good human, Marcus, but rare. Most humans, they see me, they see a thing to study, to own, to prove exists. He touched his chest, where the scar was now just a pale line. I exist whether they prove it or not. That summer, Kale started teaching Marcus things about the forest, about survival, about ways of seeing the world that humans had forgotten, how to move silently through underbrush. Kale could walk through dry leaves without making a sound, how to read weather in the way animals behaved, how to find water in the driest season, skills that Kale's people had honed over millennia. They hiked together at night when there was no risk of encountering other humans. Kale showed Marcus the deep places, the areas no trail reached, where old growth stood thick and dark and the forest felt timeless. Showed him caves where Kale's people had lived generations ago, walls marked with symbols that might have been writing or might have been art. Showed him the routes his people traveled, invisible highways through the wilderness that avoided human areas. We know where you are, Kale said one night, standing on a ridge overlooking the valley. Lights from Cascade Ridge twinkled in the distance, small and fragile against the vast darkness. Every road, every camp, every town. We navigate around you, like water around stones. There must be close calls, Marcus said. Many, especially now. More humans every year, more cameras, more trails, more. Kyle gestured, helplessly. Everything. Less space for us. Every year, less. The sadness in his voice was profound. This wasn't just about Kale, it was about a species facing extinction, not with a bang, but with a whimper, slowly squeezed into smaller and smaller refuges until there was nowhere left to hide. What will you do? Marcus asked. Your people, I mean. Long term. Kale was quiet for a long time. Below them, an owl called. The wind moved through the pines like breathing. Don't know, he said finally. Elders talk. Some say move north, Canada, Alaska, more wilderness. Some say stay, hope humans don't find us. Some say, he paused, some say maybe time to stop hiding, maybe time to let humans know we exist. That's dangerous. All options dangerous now. Hide, maybe go extinct anyway. Reveal ourselves, maybe get captured. No good choices. Kale looked at Marcus. What you think? You know humans better than me. Marcus considered it. The question was huge, complex, weighted with consequences he couldn't fully calculate. What would humanity do if Sasquatch was proven to exist? Study them, certainly. Protect them, maybe. Exploit them, probably. It would depend on who found them first, on whether governments could be trusted to do the right thing, on whether curiosity would outweigh compassion. I think, Marcus said slowly, that the world isn't ready. Not yet. Too many people would see your people as commodities, subjects to study, attractions. The ones with good intentions would want to help, but they'd still want to control. And control, even benevolent control, isn't freedom. Kyle nodded. Yes, this is what I think too. But time running out. Maybe no choice soon. They stood there on the ridge, man and Sasquatch, looking down at civilization's distant lights. Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down. They were living in a liminal moment, a space between worlds. KL's people were ghosts, already fading. And Marcus was a witness to their twilight. The last human to know them as they truly were. Not as specimens or celebrities or mysteries, but as people. Intelligent, feeling, complex people who just wanted to survive. Whatever happens, Marcus said, I won't let them take you. Not while I'm alive. Kale's hand came down on his shoulder, gentle despite its size. I know, friend, I know. The years blurred together after that. Not because they were boring, Marcus's life had never been more interesting, but because they fell into a rhythm, a routine, the comfortable patterns of a friendship so deep it needed no explanation. 5 years in, KL was writing a comprehensive ethnography of his people. Their language, which he was teaching Marcus, though human throats couldn't make all the sounds, their social structures, their beliefs, their technologies, everything he could remember, everything the elders had told him, everything worth preserving. If we die out, Kale said, working by lamplight while Marcus edited his book chapters, at least someone will know we were here. Really were here, not just stories. 10 years in, Marcus was 73. His back was worse, his knees shot, his hearing going, but he was alive in ways he hadn't been since Claire died. Kale adapted to Marcus's aging, taking over more of the physical tasks, chopping wood, hauling water when the pump broke, making sure Marcus took his medications. You getting old, Kale observed one morning, watching Marcus struggle with the porch steps. We're both getting old, Marcus countered. Yes, but I old at 77, you old at 73, you age faster. Humans do. Marcus eased into his chair with a grunt. What's the lifespan for your people? Don't know exactly. Oldest I knew was maybe 120 winters, but hard life. Most not live so long. They sat in silence, both thinking the same thing. Time was running out. For Kale's people, for Marcus, for their strange, impossible friendship. 15 years in, Marcus had a health scare. Heart attack, minor, but enough to put him in the hospital for 3 days. Kale stayed hidden near the cabin, worried. When Marcus finally came home older, frailer, facing his mortality in a way he hadn't before, Kale was waiting on the porch. Thought you died, Kale said quietly. Not yet. Got a few more years in me. Hope so. Don't want to be alone again. That statement, the raw honesty of it, made Marcus's chest tight. Not from the heart attack, from emotion. They'd become dependent on each other. Marcus had become Kale's connection to humanity, his teacher and friend. And Kale had become Marcus's purpose, his reason to keep going. Without each other, they'd both be adrift. 20 years in, technology caught up with them. Trail cameras everywhere. Drones. Hikers with smartphones, satellite imagery. The forest was no longer remote. Nowhere was, really. Kale's movements became more restricted, riskier. Several times, they had close calls, a hiker camping too near the cabin, a search party looking for a lost child, a Forest Service survey team mapping the area. Getting harder, Kale said one night. He was 77 now, showing his age in gray patches through the fur, in movement slightly slower than before. Maybe need to move. Deeper wilderness. Where? Marcus asked. He was 83. Too old to relocate. Too old to start over. Alaska? Maybe. Or maybe. Kale trailed off. Didn't finish the sentence. But Marcus knew what he was thinking. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time for this chapter, whatever it was, to end. But they kept going. Stubbornness, maybe. Or hope. Or just the human and Sasquatch tendency to cling to what they knew, even when change was inevitable. 30 years in, Marcus fell. Bad fall. Hiking alone, despite knowing better. Broke his hip. Couldn't get up. Would have died out there if Kale hadn't found him, carried him back to the cabin gentle despite Marcus's screams of pain, and used Marcus's cell phone to call for help before disappearing into the trees. Recovery was long, months. When Marcus finally came home from rehab, walking with a cane and feeling every one of his 93 years, Kale was there. Too old for forest, Kale said. Not unkindly, just fact. Yeah, Marcus admitted. Too old for a lot of things now. They adjusted again. Their hikes stopped, their adventures curtailed, the friendship became quieter, more domestic. KL helped Marcus with daily tasks, cooking, cleaning, the things that had become difficult. Marcus continued working on their project, the massive document that was part ethnography, part memoir, part love letter to a friendship that had sustained them both. 35 years in, Marcus started having memory issues. Not dementia, the doctors said his mind was sharp as ever. But retrieval problems, names, dates, details, it scared him. Scared him more than the heart attack, more than the broken hip, because his memories of these years with Cale were precious. The thought of losing them was unbearable, Cale noticed, started writing things down for Marcus, creating a record not just of Sasquatch history, but of their history together. So you remember, he said. Even if mind forgets, words will remember. 40 years in, Marcus was 93, Cale was 97. They were old men by any measure, their bodies failing in small ways and large. But the friendship held, deepened even. It had become the central fact of both their lives, the thing that defined them. And then, one morning in September 40 years and 3 days after Marcus had first found Cale bleeding in the ravine, everything came crashing down. The helicopters arrived at dawn. 3 of them, black and unmarked, roaring over the treetops and shattering the mountain silence. Marcus was on the porch, coffee in hand, still the same routine after all these years when he heard them. Felt his stomach drop, because he knew. Somehow, he knew. They'd been found. Cale was in the cabin. They'd spent the night going through old photographs, Marcus's memories, captured on film. Claire, Vietnam, the early years of his career, and mixed in, carefully hidden, a few photos of Cale. Just a few. Marcus had been so careful, but maybe not careful enough. The helicopters landed in the clearing half a mile from the cabin. Men poured out. Not uniforms exactly, but the kind of tactical gear that screamed federal. Marcus watched them come up the trail, his heart doing things that definitely weren't healthy, his hands shaking so badly coffee slopped over the mug's rim. Cale appeared in the doorway behind him, silent, always silent when he wanted to be. Those brown eyes met Marcus's, and in them Marcus saw a lifetime of fear realized, the thing they'd both dreaded, the ending they'd hoped to avoid, rushing toward them like an avalanche. Go, Marcus said, out the back, into the deep woods. No. Cale's voice was steady. Sad, but steady. Too late for running. You know this. He was right. The men were surrounding the cabin, not just coming up the main trail, but spreading out, encircling, professional, coordinated. This wasn't some random search party. This was a tactical operation. Someone knew. Someone had told. The lead agent, if that's what he was, stopped 20 feet from the porch. 50s, maybe. Hard face that had seen things. He looked at Marcus, then past him to where Cale stood in the doorway, and something like wonder crossed his features. Just for a second. Then it was gone. Replaced by professional calm. Mr. Thompson, he said, voice carrying that particular authority that comes from years of giving orders that are obeyed. My name is Agent Connor Hayes. We need you and your companion to come with us. Like hell, Marcus said. His voice came out stronger than he felt. This is private property. You have no right. We have every right. Hayes pulled a document from his jacket. Even from the porch, Marcus could see official seals, government letterhead, the weight of bureaucratic power made paper, presidential finding, signed 3 months ago. Any and all evidence of cryptid species are matters of national security. You've been harboring an unregistered biological entity for, he checked another paper, approximately 40 years. That's a federal crime under about 6 different statutes I could cite. He's not an entity, Marcus said. The anger felt good, cutting through the fear. His name is Cale. He's a person, and I haven't harbored anyone. He's my friend. Hayes' expression softened slightly. I understand this is difficult, Mr. Thompson, and I want you to know we're not the bad guys here. We're not here to harm anyone. But this discovery, it's too important to remain hidden. The scientific implications alone. Screw your scientific implications. Marcus stepped forward, ignoring the way several agents tensed, hands moving toward weapons. You want to study him? Put him in a cage. Turn him into a specimen. I won't let that happen. It's not your choice. Hayes' voice was gentle but firm. The tone of someone who's had this conversation before, who knows how it ends. This is bigger than you, bigger than both of you. The world has a right to know. Cale's hand came down on Marcus's shoulder. Warm, steady. Marcus is okay. It's not okay, Marcus said, his voice cracking. 93 years old and he sounded like a child. It's not. Is time. Cale moved past him down the porch steps. Standing in the morning light, he was magnificent. 8 feet of living impossibility. The men stared. Even Hayes, who'd clearly been briefed, couldn't hide his amazement. I come, no fight, but promise, he looked at Hayes directly. Promise you not hurt Marcus. He protected me. He good human. Hayes nodded slowly. No one's getting hurt. You have my word. Word's easy, Cale said. Actions matter. Show me you good humans. Like Marcus. They took them in separate helicopters. That was the first cruelty, the first broken promise. Marcus argued, shouted, actually, until his throat was raw, but they separated them anyway. National security protocols, they said. Standard procedure. The last thing Marcus saw before the helicopter door closed was Cale, surrounded by armed men, looking small despite his size. Looking afraid. The flight was maybe 30 minutes. Marcus was too disoriented, too upset to track direction. They'd taken his watch, his phone, everything. When they landed, he was helped practically carried into a facility that looked like a cross between a research center and a military base. Concrete and steel, harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant. They put him in a room, not a cell exactly, more like a sparse hotel room. Bed, chair, small bathroom, but the door locked from the outside, and there were cameras in the corners. Marcus sat on the bed and tried to think through the panic. 40 years of secrecy, blown apart in minutes. How had they found out? He'd been so careful. No photos online, no digital records. The written ethnographies were hidden, encrypted, backed up in places no one would think to look. Unless the trail cameras. Marcus's stomach sank. He'd been checking his own cameras obsessively, but what about other people's? Hikers, hunters, researchers, anyone could have placed cameras in those woods. One photo, that's all it would take. One clear photo uploaded to the wrong forum, analyzed by the right person, and suddenly the machinery of government secrecy would grind into motion. Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe someone had seen something, heard something. 40 years was a long time to keep any secret, even between two people who loved each other. The door opened. A woman entered. Younger than Hayes, maybe early 50s, professional attire, tablet in hand, but her eyes were kind. That was something, at least. Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez. I'm a xenobiologist with the National Science Foundation. She sat in the chair across from him. I know this is frightening, but I want you to understand, we're not your enemies. Could have fooled me, Marcus said. Where's Cale? He's safe. He's in a secure habitat a few buildings over. Medical team is examining him, making sure he's healthy. He doesn't need examining. I've been monitoring his health for 40 years. Dr. Martinez smiled slightly. Yes, we know. We've been aware of your situation for about 3 months now. Satellite thermal imaging picked up anomalies near your cabin. Further investigation confirmed what we'd only theorized about. She leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, Marcus, do you understand what you've accomplished? You've maintained a relationship with a species we thought might be extinct. You've documented a first contact situation. The knowledge you've gained is invaluable. The knowledge isn't yours to take. It's not about taking. It's about understanding. About protecting. She pulled up something on her tablet, turned it to show him. A map with red dots scattered across the Pacific Northwest. These are suspected Sasquatch sightings in the last decade. Notice anything? Marcus looked. The dots were thinning, clustering in smaller areas. Their range is shrinking rapidly. At current rates, we estimate the population will be functionally extinct within 20 years, maybe less. Dr. Martinez's face was serious, but if we can study them, understand their needs, we might be able to help. Create protected habitats, breeding programs if necessary, ensure their survival. Breeding programs. Marcus felt sick. You mean captivity. I mean conservation. There's a difference. Not to them, Dr. Martinez sighed. I understand your perspective. Really, I do. But the alternative is watching them disappear. Is that better? Keeping your secret while an entire species goes extinct? The words hit hard because she wasn't wrong. Marcus had thought about this over the years. Late at night, alone with his guilt and his fear, was he helping Cale by hiding him? Or was he condemning Cale's entire species by staying silent? It was the question that had haunted him for 40 years, and he still didn't have an answer. I want to see him, Marcus said. Cale. Now. I'm not sure that's... Now. Marcus stood up, using the bed for support. His hip ached, his hands shook, but his voice was steady. You want my cooperation? You want the documentation I've compiled? Then, let me see, my friend. Or you get nothing. Dr. Martinez studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, come with me. They walked through corridors that smelled like government coffee and copying machines, and the particular staleness of air that's been recycled too many times. Marcus's cane tapped against linoleum. His hip screamed with every step, but he kept moving, following Dr. Martinez through a maze of bureaucracy and bad lighting. They stopped at a security door. She scanned her badge, entered a code. The door opened onto an observation room. One wall was glass one way, Marcus assumed. Beyond it, a larger space. Not a cage. Exactly. More like a very large enclosure designed to look like forest habitat. Trees, real ones somehow, growing under artificial sunlight. A stream, boulders, and Cale sitting on the ground with his back to a tree, surrounded by 3 people in white coats. Let me in, Marcus said. That's not protocol. I don't give a damn about protocol. Marcus looked at her. 40 years, Dr. Martinez. 40 years I kept him safe, kept him secret. You want him to cooperate with your studies? He'll listen to me, but only if I can talk to him. Face to face. She hesitated, then spoke into a radio. After a tense minute, the response came back. Approved. 15 minutes, supervised. The door to the habitat opened. Marcus stepped through, and Cale's head snapped up. Those brown eyes found him, and relief flooded through them. Cale stood, making the researchers scatter backward and cross the space in 3 strides. His hand came down on Marcus's shoulder, gentle despite its size. You okay? Cale asked. They hurt you? I'm fine. Are you? Scared. Cale glanced at the researchers, at the cameras mounted in the corners, at the glass wall with its invisible watchers. Very scared. I know. Me too. They stood there, old man and older being, finding comfort in proximity. The researchers watched with open fascination. One of them, a young guy with glasses, couldn't be more than 30, stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Blake Allen. I just want to say what you've done here, it's remarkable. The trust you've built, the communication. We're hoping you'll help us establish similar rapport. He's not a research subject, Marcus said. He's a person. Of course. I didn't mean Blake fumbled, flustered. We just want to understand, to help his species survive. Cale looked at the young researcher. You help by leaving alone, by protecting forest, by making humans stop spreading everywhere. We can't do that, Blake said, but we can create sanctuaries. Protected zones where your people can live without human interference. Protected zones. Cale's voice was heavy with skepticism. Like zoos, like reservations. Humans always say protect, always mean control. It's not like that, isn't it? Cale's gaze swept the habitat. Already you put me in cage. Pretty cage, yes, but cage, the word hung in the air. Cage. Because that's what it was, no matter how they dressed it up. A prison with trees and a stream, but still a prison. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. This was his fault. He'd protected Cale for 40 years, and now Cale was trapped because of that protection. Because Marcus had been found. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered. I'm so sorry. Not your fault. Cale's hand squeezed his shoulder. We knew this might happen. We chose friendship anyway. No regrets, Marcus. Never regrets. Dr. Martinez's voice came through a speaker. Mr. Thompson, we need to debrief you. There's a lot to discuss. Protocols to establish. If you'll come back to... Give us a minute, Marcus said. Please. A pause. Then, 5 minutes. Marcus looked up at Cale. At the face that had become so familiar over the years. The heavy brow, the broad nose, the eyes that held more humanity than most humans managed. 40 years of mornings on the porch and evenings by the fire, of teaching and learning, of friendship deeper than species. What do we do? Marcus asked. Cale was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the artificial forest rustled in artificial wind. The stream burbled over stones, a mockery of the real thing, a shadow of the freedom they'd had. We adapt, Cale said, finally. Like always, we survive. This isn't surviving. This is what we have now. Cale's voice was steady, sad but steady. World changed. We changed too. Maybe, he paused, choosing words carefully, maybe this not all bad. Maybe now my people get help, real help, protection we need at the cost of your freedom. Freedom was dying anyway. You said yourself, range shrinking, numbers dropping. Maybe this way we survive. Not as we were, but he shrugged those massive shoulders. Survival matters more than pride. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the injustice of it. But Cale was right. The choice wasn't between freedom and captivity, it was between adaptation and extinction. And if 40 years had taught Marcus anything, it was that Cale's people deserved to survive, whatever the cost. Okay, Marcus said, then I'll help them. I'll tell them everything I know. On one condition. What condition? You get to make choices. About your care. About how you're studied. About everything. Not as a subject, as a consultant. As a partner. Marcus raised his voice, directing it toward the glass wall. You hear that? Cale isn't a specimen. He's a person, and he gets treated like one. Or, I don't cooperate. At all. Silence from the speakers. Then Dr. Martinez's voice. We'll discuss terms. No discussion. Those are the terms. Non-negotiable. Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus could imagine the conversation happening beyond the glass. The weighing of options. The calculation of need versus principle. Finally, agreed. But Mr. Thompson, you need to understand there will be limits, security protocols, oversight. As long as Cale has agency in this, as long as he's not just something you experiment on. Understood. Marcus looked back at Kale. Is this okay? Can you live with this? Kale's eyes held something complex. Fear, yes. Sadness, definitely. But also something that might have been relief. The relief of not having to hide anymore, of potentially helping his people, of adapting, as he'd always done, to new circumstances. Can live with it, Kale said. If you stay, if you help. Can't do this alone, Marcus. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus promised. We're in this together, like always. They stood there in the artificial forest, two old friends facing an uncertain future. The world had found them. The secret was out. Everything they'd built over 40 years was being dismantled and reassembled into something new, something neither of them had chosen. But they still had each other. That mattered. Maybe that was all that mattered. The 5 minutes ended. Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the speakers again, calling Marcus back. He squeezed Kale's hand once, that massive hand that had carried him when he'd fallen, that had worked alongside his for decades, that represented a friendship deeper than language could fully express. I'll be back, Marcus said. I promise. I know. Kale managed something like a smile. You always keep promises. Marcus left the habitat. The door sealed behind him with a hiss of hydraulics and the click of electronic locks. He followed Dr. Martinez back through the corridors, each step taking him further from KL, his hips screaming, his heart heavier than his body. They put him in an office. Comfortable, at least. A window showing actual sunlight. Dr. Martinez sat across from him, tablet ready, and for the next 6 hours, Marcus told her everything. About finding Kale wounded in the ravine, about the first words spoken, about teaching him to read and write, about the ethnography they'd compiled, the stories preserved. The 40 years of learning and growing and being less alone together. Other people cycled through. Anthropologists, linguists, biologists, a government liaison who asked questions about security protocols and whether Marcus had told anyone else. No, Marcus said. Just the two of them. 40 years of keeping the biggest secret in natural history. By evening, Marcus was exhausted. They'd arranged quarters for him, actual quarters, not a cell. A small apartment in the facility with a real bed, a kitchenette, a television, but the door still locked from the outside. He was still a prisoner, just a comfortable one. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Kale alone in the habitat. About 40 years of freedom traded for the possibility of species survival, about whether he'd done the right thing, helping Kale all those years, whether secrecy had been kindness or cruelty. Around midnight, there was a knock. Dr. Martinez opened the door. Can't sleep? Would you? Marcus asked. She smiled slightly. No. Listen, I brought you something. She handed him a tablet, video feed from Kale's habitat, so you can check on him. It's not much, but it was something. Marcus took the tablet, and there was Kale, visible in infrared, sitting by the artificial stream, awake, looking toward the camera as if he knew Marcus might be watching. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. We're not monsters, Dr. Martinez said. We're scientists. We want to understand, to help. But we also recognize that you and Kale, what you have, it matters. We'll honor that as much as we can. She left. Marcus watched the screen, watched Kale sit in the dark, and felt the weight of 40 years pressed down on him. They'd been found. The hiding was over. Now came the hard part, figuring out how to live in a world that knew what they'd protected for so long. The days blurred into weeks. Marcus's life became a strange routine of debriefing sessions, medical checks, and supervised visits with Kale. They'd let him spend a few hours each day in the habitat. Not enough. Never enough. But more than nothing, the facility filled with researchers, people from universities, government agencies, conservation organizations, all wanting to study Kale, to understand his biology, his cognition, his culture. Kale endured it with more grace than Marcus could have managed, answered questions, submitted to tests, let them take samples, blood, hair, tissue. Why are you cooperating? Marcus asked during one visit. You could refuse. You have that right now. Because they find others, Kale said. Found 3 more of my people in Canada, 2 in Alaska. They know about the last groups. If I cooperate, if I show we intelligent, we people, not animals, maybe they treat others better, maybe we survive others. That was the revelation that had come 2 weeks into their captivity. Kale wasn't unique, wasn't the last. There were maybe 27 Sasquatch left in North America, scattered, isolated, dying out. But still there. And now the government knew was rounding them up. For their protection, Dr. Martinez said. To establish breeding programs, conservation efforts, concentration camps, Marcus said bitterly. That's what you mean. Sanctuaries, she corrected. Legal protection. Recognition as an endangered species. It's the best chance they have. Maybe she was right. Marcus didn't know anymore. The moral certainties he'd had 40 years ago, that hiding Kale was right, that secrecy was protection, had eroded. Maybe species survival mattered more than individual freedom. Maybe adaptation was the only path forward. Or maybe he was just too old, too tired to fight anymore. A month in, something shifted. The media found out. Someone leaked an aid worker, a researcher, someone, and suddenly it was everywhere. Government confirms Bigfoot exists. Last Sasquatch in captivity. Species on brink of extinction. The public response was complicated. Fascination, yes, but also outrage. How long had the government known? Why the secrecy? What were they doing with these beings? Were they being treated humanely? Protests formed outside the facility, some demanding the Sasquatch be freed, others demanding more protection. Scientists arguing over classification. Were they human? A subspecies of human? Something else entirely? The debate raged on talk shows, in academic journals, in congressional hearings. And through it all, Marcus and Kale sat in the habitat and watched the world discover what they'd known for 40 years. That intelligence came in many forms, that humanity wasn't the only kind of people walking the earth, that the wild still held mysteries, and some mysteries were worth preserving. "You famous now," Kyle said one afternoon, gesturing to the tablet that showed news coverage. Marcus's face was plastered across every screen, the man who'd hidden Bigfoot for 40 years, hero to some, criminal to others, eccentric to most. "Infamous maybe," Marcus said. "No, hero." Kale's voice was firm. "You protected me when no one else would. You gave me family when I had none. You let me be person, not specimen." He paused. "Cannot change what's happening now, but can remember what we had. 40 years of good life, good friendship. Not everyone gets that." Tears stung Marcus's eyes. He was 93 years old, had lived through war and love and loss and impossible things, and this friendship was still the best thing he'd ever been part of. "No regrets?" Marcus asked. "No regrets," Kale confirmed. "Would do again. All of it." They sat in silence, two old friends in an artificial forest, while the world outside argued over what they meant, over how to classify them, study them, protect them, but in this moment, in this space, they were just Marcus and Kale. Human and Sasquatch, friends who'd chosen each other over everything else. 2 months in, they announced the decision. The facility would become a research center, but also a sanctuary. Kale and the other Sasquatch would live there, protected by law and military security. They'd have freedom within the grounds, thousands of acres of preserved forest. They'd have agency in research decisions. They'd be recognized as a protected species with legal personhood status. Not quite free, but not quite imprisoned either. A compromise between survival and liberty. Marcus would stay. That was non-negotiable as far as he was concerned. The government agreed his expertise was valuable, his relationship with Kale was unique. He'd become the official liaison between human researchers and Sasquatch subjects, a bridge between species. It wasn't what Marcus had wanted. Wasn't what either of them had wanted. 40 years of hiding, 40 years of freedom in the wild, traded for visibility and protection, and the slow machinery of bureaucratic conservation. But it was what they had, and maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The other Sasquatch arrived gradually over the next months. Kale met them with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Joy at seeing his people, some he'd known in his youth. Sorrow at how few remained. 27 souls. That's all that was left of a species that had walked the earth for 1,000,000 years. But they were alive, together, protected. It was something. Marcus celebrated his 94th birthday in the facility. Kale made him a cake, or tried to. The result was lopsided and slightly burned, but Marcus ate it anyway, touched by the gesture. They sat on the porch of Marcus's quarters, actual quarters now, not cells, with a view of the sanctuary, and watched the sun set over the forest. "You think Claire would approve?" Marcus asked. "Of all this?" Kale considered. "Think she would understand. She loved you. She know you do what right, even when hard. I miss her." "I know. I miss my mate too, but we found each other. That count for something. It counted for everything." That was the truth Marcus had learned over 40 years. Connection matters. Love matters. Friendship across impossible divides matters. The rest, the science, the politics, the grand questions of species, survival, all of it was secondary to the simple fact that two beings had found each other in the wilderness and decided to care. The sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the sanctuary, the other Sasquatch called to each other their own language, complex and layered, that Marcus had learned to recognize, if not fully understand. Kale answered, his voice deep and resonant, carrying through the trees. "What did you say?" Marcus asked. "I say, found home, found family, found peace. KL looked at him. Is true? We have those things now? Marcus thought about it. Home, not the one he'd chosen, but a home nonetheless. Family scattered and strange, but still family. Peace complicated by captivity, but real in its way. Yeah, he said. I think we do. They sat together as darkness fell, two old souls in the twilight of their lives, watching stars emerge in a sky that belonged to no one and everyone. The world knew about Sasquatch now. The secret was out. The future uncertain. But they had this moment, this friendship, these 40 years of choosing each other, again and again, despite all the reasons not to. That was worth something. That was worth everything. And as Marcus drifted toward sleep in his chair, Kale's hand steady on his shoulder, he thought, this is how it ends. Not with hiding, not with fear, but with two friends, together, facing whatever comes next, the way they always had, the way they always would, for whatever time remained. The last thing Marcus heard before sleep took him was Kale's voice, soft in the darkness. Thank you, friend, for everything. Thank you, Marcus whispered back. For the same, and the stars turned overhead, indifferent to the drama of species and secrets, and the strange bonds that form between unlikely souls. The world spun on. Time moved forward. But in that moment, on that porch, two old friends had everything they needed, each other, and the memory of 40 years spent protecting something impossible, something beautiful, something worth every sacrifice they'd made. The years after went fast, the way years do when you're counting down instead of up. Marcus made it to 97 before the cancer came back, different kind than Claire's, but just as inevitable. The doctor said 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. Marcus declined the treatment. He was tired, ready. KL sat with him through the decline. The sanctuary allowed its special dispensation for end-of-life care. They spent Marcus's final months the way they'd spent so many before, talking, reading, sitting in comfortable silence. The sanctuary had become something more than a prison, a community, almost. The 27 Sasquatch had formed bonds, were teaching the researchers their language, their culture. 3 pregnancies had been confirmed. The species might survive, after all. You did that, Marcus said one afternoon. Too weak to leave his bed, but still lucid. You gave your people a chance. We did that, KL corrected. Together. Like everything. In the end, Marcus went the way a lot of old men go peacefully, in his sleep, with his friend nearby. KL was holding his hand when the breathing stopped. When the last bit of Marcus Thompson left the world, the nurses said KL stayed for an hour after just sitting there holding the hand of the human who'd saved him 43 years earlier, who'd given him friendship when loneliness would have killed as surely as that wound in the ravine. They buried Marcus in the sanctuary. Special approval from the director, though it wasn't technically allowed. But rules bend for stories like this, for friendships that transcend species, for two beings who defied every expectation and found family in the impossible. KO lived another 8 years, long enough to see the population grow to 34, long enough to teach his people that humans could be trusted, some of them, anyway. Long enough to finish the ethnography he and Marcus had started, now published in 7 languages, a testament to a culture that had almost vanished. When Cale died at 105, they buried him next to Marcus. 2 graves under the trees, 2 friends, together even in death. The sanctuary put up a plaque, and people came from all over to see it, to pay respects to the human who'd kept the biggest secret in history and the Sasquatch who'd trusted him with it. The plaque read simple words: Marcus Thompson 2011 to 2104, Kyle 2007 to 2112. They taught us that humanity isn't about species, it's about the choice to care. And that was true, wasn't it? That was the lesson of 43 years of impossible friendship. Not that Sasquatch existed, though they did. Not that science could explain everything, though it tried. But that connection transcends difference. That loneliness can be shared and therefore halved. That choosing to protect someone, to care for them, to sit with them through decades of quiet mornings and difficult nights, that's what makes us human or Sasquatch, or whatever we are underneath the labels and classifications. The sanctuary still exists, by the way. The Sasquatch population is up to 63 now. They have legal personhood status. Protected habitat, rights that no one thought they'd have when the government first found them. All because one old man found a wounded being in a ravine and decided to help instead of report. Sometimes stories don't have neat endings. Sometimes they just stop, and life continues on without them. But this story, Marcus and Kale's story, it ended right. Together, in a place that became home despite starting as a prison. With a legacy that mattered. And if you ever find yourself in the Pacific Northwest, visiting the Sasquatch Sanctuary, because that's what they call it now, official-like stop by those 2 graves under the pine trees, people leave flowers there. Tokens, notes, thanking Marcus for his courage, thanking KL for his trust, but mostly thanking them both for showing us what friendship looks like when it's stripped down to essentials. No pretense, no performance. Just two beings, old and tired and lonely, finding each other in the wilderness and deciding that was enough, that they were enough for each other. Because in the end, that's all any of us want, isn't it? To be seen, to be known, to have someone sit with us in the dark and say, I'm here, I won't leave, you matter to me. Marcus gave Cal that, Cal gave it back. For 43 years they gave it to each other. And the world is better for it. Richer, more full of wonder and possibility and proof that the strangest friendships are sometimes the most real. So, that's the story. The true story, as much as any story is true. Of the man who hid Bigfoot for 40 years. Of the Sasquatch who let himself be hidden. Of a friendship that changed the world without meaning to. Of choosing compassion over fear again and again until it becomes who you are. And if you're sitting there thinking, could I do that? Could I keep that kind of secret? Could I risk everything for a friend? Well, that's between you and whatever walks in your woods, whatever finds you wounded by the side of the road, whatever needs protecting in a world that doesn't always reward protection. Marcus Thompson decided yes. And that decision, that single moment of choosing help over fear, echoed forward through decades, through species survival, through everything. Not bad for a 93-year-old widower who just wanted some peace and quiet in the forest. Not bad at all.